A busy day in our courts today. Former National Assembly Speaker Vuyo Mvoko, among many that appeared in court today. Mvoko facing 13 counts of corruption and money laundering for allegedly soliciting bribes worth more than 4 million rands from contractors during her time as Defence Minister. Former Cape Town Human Settlements MMC and a former member of the Democratic Alliance, Malusi Boy, and his 9 co-accused also in court today facing fraud charges. Another court case of interest involved ANC-NEC member and former spokesperson Vuyo Mvoko, which you saw just there. Mvoko and his co-accused facing charges of corruption relating to a 27 million rands tender. Let's look at the cost of corruption on South Africa's image, and I'm now joined by Karam Singh, Executive Director at Corruption Watch. Karam, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. Slowly but surely, we are seeing more and more of these high-profile individuals having their day in court.
Yes, thanks so much, Vuyo. Good afternoon to you and to all the viewers. It's quite an extraordinary day to have such a number of high-profile political cases before the courts at the same time. I think there's been a real frustration in terms of the law enforcement response to the fight against corruption. We've seen very few prosecutions to date. All of the individuals in the dock today were all senior political figures with key positions at key institutions, Parliament, Ministry of Defence, City of Cape Town. Vuyo Mvoko has had a prominent position within the African National Congress. So I think it is encouraging that these cases are proceeding, and we can only assume that the NPA has brought these cases up to this point on the basis that they believe they have a strong case. So that is now for the courts for them to prosecute these cases and see how the justice system responds.
And that is what has been the problem, isn't it? In other words, we're seeing these serious flaws in investigations, which in turn lead to delays or even cases being dropped.
If we think about the gaps, Vuyo, I mean, there are huge gaps in terms of the number of significant allegations, the number of successful investigations, and then the number of successful investigations that actually then get translated into prosecutable cases. At every step along the way, there's kind of a drop-off, and we even hear the NPA choosing not to prosecute cases where it would seem that there are some prima facie elements of wrongdoing. Particularly, I'm thinking about the decision not to prosecute the Fala case. So there's a great backlog. These cases take years, as we saw with the VBS case, take years to unfold, and they often involve facts that happened almost in another moment in time. If you think about when the former speaker was Minister of Defence, it was a significant time period ago. So it's encouraging, but it is very slow going.
The gaps, I mean, you call them. There's been a lot of we're working together, as the criminal justice system, components, but not much by way of evidence. And I don't know if I'm wrong, but I did see there was some momentum, during COVID when it came to trying to prosecute those COVID-related cases. But that momentum, it would seem, correct me if I'm wrong, that it has been lost over time.
It's difficult. I think it's difficult. We had the State Capture Commission, which came up with extensive findings and recommendations. Some of the findings spoke about the need to finalize investigations to prepare for prosecutions. You've mentioned the PPE scandals. I mean, I think what was critical there, and I think this is also true in Vuyo Mvoko's case, is that the evidence the evidence of criminality flowed from an SIU investigation. We know that the SIU has deep forensic investigative capacity, but they don't have a criminal jurisdiction to do full-scale criminal investigation. So when they come up with findings of criminality, there's a handoff to the police and to the prosecution services to take these matters forward. And as you say, whenever there's a handoff within the criminal justice system, whether it be from the SIU to the police, from the police to the prosecution services, it's oftentimes where things slow down and where you get this sense that there is no momentum, that it's a kind of it's one step forward, one step back. So I do think going forward, if we're going to really think about denting the fight against corruption, that we have to have a much more coherent and seamless criminal justice sector response where all of the different elements are working together, similar to what we saw at the Fusion Center during the PPE scandal. So, some of us think that could be resolved by the establishment of a new Scorpions, a new anti-corruption agency. But obviously, the independent directorate is getting up and running, and the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council is providing other recommendations to the presidency on the issue of how we can have a more coherent and impactful law enforcement response.
Interesting. You are mentioning the NPA's decision not to prosecute on the Pala Pala case, and you're also mentioning the SIU, which only this week was boasting about, its achievements and accomplishments, because bearing in mind the fact that the SIU relies on those proclamations from the president for them to pursue these cases. Would that be one of the examples of serious flaws in how the entire criminal justice works?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the SIU has developed a significant forensic capacity. They've been around since 1996. People will remember the old Heath Commission of Inquiry. It was headed up for many years very ably by Willy Hofmeyr. But, they're not an anti-corruption agency that can do investigations without a proclamation in place. They're not a fully independent arm of the state, as would be akin to a police force or a anti-corruption agency. So while we have this fantastic capacity, its mandate is limited. Its mandate is limited to doing asset recovery and not doing criminal investigations. So there needs to be a realignment. This is clearly identified as a challenge within the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. And I know it is an issue which the National Advisory Council Against Corruption is seized with in terms of the types of advisories they're providing to the presidency.
Whatever happened to the anti-corruption task team? And I suppose the same question can be asked of the Fusion Center, which you mentioned, which did a lot of work in prosecuting those COVID corruption cases.
The anti-corruption task team was a strategy from another era. I mean, its formation goes back almost to a pre-state capture era. It sort of found another expression in terms of the Fusion Center. But these were now attempts to, on the basis that South Africa has a multi-agency approach to the fight against corruption, that there's not a single dedicated anti-corruption agency. So we have SARS, we have the Financial Intelligence Center, we have the NPA, we have the Asset Forfeiture Unit, many of them related bodies with distinct, in some cases, overlapping mandates. But again, it hasn't worked in a seamless way. I think those that argue for a multi-agency approach often say that, we need this to kind of safeguard ourselves against the possibility of a single agency being captured in the future. But certainly, as we think about deepening our democracy, if we think about the implications of the Glenister judgments at the Constitutional Court, we have to be much bolder and more ambitious in terms of the requirements of creating independent, competent, impactful agencies at the level of state that are able to deal with the complex phenomenon of organized corruption and organized crime. Because at the moment, the innovation, the kind of adapting to the circumstances is happening by the fraudsters, by the organized criminals, and it seems as if the response from the state remains very much on the back foot. So this has to, we have to think about evolving the mandate of the SIU, and we really need to go back into the Glenister judgments to think about what are the obligations of the Constitution in terms of really fighting corruption in an impactful way that deals with the systemic corruption, that deals with grand corruption, but that also deals with the petty day-to-day corruption that that people have to deal with when they interface with public authorities.
I suppose it was no coincidence that your task team, anti-corruption task team, was co-chaired by the Director for Priority Crimes and Investigations, but also by the National Director of Public Prosecutions. And both those organizations were hollowed out, and they were the first targets, of people who wanted to capture the state. And all of this, of course, leading to South Africa now falling under the category of flawed democracies, and that's according to Transparency International.
That's right. South Africa's score has stagnated in terms of the Corruption Perception Index. South Africa has also been grey listed by the Financial Action Task Force as a jurisdiction which is vulnerable to wide-scale money laundering. The FATF grey listing also bemoans the slow pace of prosecutions. I think we can go back to the moment where the Scorpions were dissolved. We can look at how the state capture project unfolded in terms of capturing, the procurement budgets at the big SOEs. But when you talk about the NPA and the leadership of the police, including crime intelligence being hollowed out or being repurposed for state capture, it's also important to note that those issues were not canvassed by the Zondo Commission in a substantive way. We didn't get a comprehensive review of the criminal justice system, such that the agents of state capture that occupied positions in those organizations are not being investigated. They're not being brought to book. The Zondo Commission did an outstanding job, and there's so much work that can flow from it, including implementing some very sound recommendations that come from it. But in terms of rebuilding institutions of state, it has to happen one institution at a time, whether it be SARS, whether it be the NPA, whether it be the South African Police Service. And we certainly can complement, the work that's been done by the leadership at the NPA and particularly at SARS in terms of reestablishing credibility of those organizations. But in terms of fully realizing the mandate, particularly at the NPA, there's still so much work that needs to be done.
Karam Singh, thank you very much for your time. He's the Executive Director at Corruption Watch. Coming up next, we look at racism at schools. That story and more in a moment.